Welcome to this episode of the Level Design Podcast. In this episode, we head out to enjoy the landscapes and gardens that in the games we love with Rob Dwiar. Let's get on with the show. Hello and welcome to the podcast. It's been a little while. Have you missed us? Well, we're back. We've had a lovely summer break to stretch our legs, go out to a few gardens and a few landscapes and enjoy the outside air. Have you been doing, Valentina? Have you been enjoying this beautiful summer that we've had?
Yeah, summer has been really nice and warm, and for once, really enjoyable in Scotland. No wind, no rain, and it's just perfect. Yeah.
Are you being sarcastic, or are you being
No. We've had really good days, and
right.
yeah, I tried to use them as much as I could.
Oh, that's excellent. And welcome back, Johnny. You ready for another season of the Level Design Podcast? Are you raring to go?
I am. I've missed it. It's like it was always nice to have that touch in, and just it's always nice to talk with you guys about level design in general. Becomes part of my routine, and I'm happy to have it back.
Yes, and we're back for another superb season. And in this first episode of the new season, we have the lovely Rob Dwiar, a man of many hats that has been doing lots of things. Game journalist, writer and author, which I guess are kind of the same thing if you look at it, but also a landscape and garden designer. Now that's a plethora of hats there, Rob. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Yes, it's I usually just sum it up shortly and just say, oh, I'm a career changer. But yeah, I actually try and do a bit of all of those things really, and equally in both the games industry and the garden industry. So yeah, hopefully we can have a look around at some interesting landscapes and gardens today as well.
Right. So one of the amazing things that we've had on the show is people that are talking about having experiences outside games that are very well or interestingly depicted in games, right? And when you first contacted us and we had a quick chat, I was like, one of my favorite games has got a whole bunch of design in it, and we talk about level design, but we have garden design, right? And that's a whole skill, a whole trade, a whole thing in itself. Dishonored is one of the games that comes to mind when talking about that, and also Hitman, but that's another deathly story. But you've been working on a book about all of this.
Yeah, so I've put my expertise in both fields, and it's sort of how I got into games, media, and writing in the first place. But yeah, I just thought there's quite a lot to say about gardens and landscapes and plants and the way they're used in games, and it's culminated in from going from sporadic writings for games media websites like Eurogamer and Rock Paper Shotgun and PC Games N and Games Radar, where I work day to day now, and it's all culminated into a book which I'm writing and crowdfunding for, which is it's called Genius Loci, a grand tour of video game landscapes and gardens.
It sounds wonderful. It sounds like I feel like a Victorian gentleman that's getting my trunk ready.
This is the kind of angles when we were throwing around some title ideas around. I quite like this phrase Genius Loci. It's used in the design industry, in architecture and gardens and landscapes quite a lot.
Is it the spirit of the place, or
yeah?
So
like that? Yeah, so it originally in the Roman times, it was used as to describe a literal, in their view, guardian spirit of a place. And over time, it's sort of become more used sort of as an atmosphere descriptor, and a sense of place is probably the best sort of not normal, in inverted commas, translation of it. But it was Alexander Pope in the 1700s, I think it was, or 1600s, started to apply it, was the first one to apply it to landscapes. He said to landowners, if you're redesigning, consult the genius of the place. And so one thing that I really liked and discovered about video game gardens and landscapes is that they do have this sense of place. You can think of your favorite places in games, and they often have a lot in common with your favorite real places.
Yeah.
So it's very evocative. It can bring out emotions. Its atmosphere is, you know, rich and thick. And so that seemed to sort of tie in nicely to what the book's about and the exploration that we're going to do. And then the second part of it, a grand tour of it, is a direct nod to the idea that when you became of age in 1700s, 1800s, you would go on a grand tour to Europe or around Europe and visit all the wonderful cultural landmarks, gardens, palaces, see paintings, listen to music that you wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So it's encapsulated it quite nicely and brings the two worlds quite nicely together in its own title.
Because there is a big love in this podcast. We have talked about it many times, I think, of games such as Dishonored, games like Death Stranding, and ironically enough, I've been watching a bit of the Chelsea Flower Show is about to be right at the moment, and you're a winner of a gold medal winner of I'm not sure of is it of the flower show or garden?
Well, that would be a thing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, right. That's the ultimate goal, isn't it? That's
just wins the show. Yeah,
just won it.
So when my previous job to working at Games Radar now as a hardware editor. So previous to that, I was a landscape architect for a multidisciplinary landscape practice that did golf courses, resorts, landscape design, residential designs. And during that, I took part in a national competition with the RHS which is a young designer of the year, and it was to people aged 28 and under. That qualifies as young, I think, to the RHS for some reason. And
it's near enough, right?
Yeah, and exactly. And there were three. Got through to the final three, and you get help with the sort of money and the advice to build your own show garden. And it was sort of televised, and it's a nationally run competition, and me and my garden won a gold medal displaying at RHS Tatton, which is in Manchester, in 2016. So I've got that experience and a little gold medal in the cabinet behind me somewhere as well.
You're gonna have to have like the picture on the book of you holding the medal, going look,
or just wearing it.
Yeah, just wearing just like casually, like
on the inside, you know, where it's about the author. You're just gonna have that.
then
completely like pointing.
Then you have to be superimposed onto your favorite video game landscape, just on a hill somewhere.
Yeah, that seems. Yeah, I should be writing this down. Yeah.
You too.
Yeah. One of the things that I have found hard as a level designer has been this idea of landscape design, actually, is because that's a completely different... Well, I don't know. To me, it seems like a completely different set of skills than like architectural, like man-made level design. Does that make sense? Because like you've got these construction patterns. For me, it's like, okay, right, yeah, this is what a human would do. But then you've got this idea of, well, okay, I know, realize humans make landscape gardens and stuff like that. But when you're trying to replicate nature or green things, I just fail. So what have you been discovering in your grand tour or your grand virtual tour?
Well, it's always interesting because obviously you've got the design process of the game is one design process. The design process of literally of that level is a design process itself. But then if you're trying to design, you know, a building of a certain style, you're engaging in that design process as well. And the same goes for garden design and landscape design. I think, I mean, what I have discovered, and probably what we all know of, is that game devs and environment artists are incredibly talented at recreating real life inspired or real life portrayals of the outside world. They are very good at it. But where it really comes alive is just going just a step beyond and then onwards beyond the aesthetic as well. And that's why garden design, the gardens designed in Dishonored is such a good bit of game design and level design, because it's actually, as far as I can tell, they would have had to go through some sort of similar process that I did when designing gardens. You know, working out who the client is, what they need, what the uses are, the location, how it's going to be used. But then also, of course, with this minding that a player in the game has got to accomplish certain things and navigate around it and and interact with it. It is very interesting. There's multiple design processes in play at sort of once. If that
I've
makes sense.
been I actually played Prey again recently because that's all I do with my life. It's a really great game to study. Play arcane games because I love their designs and stuff. And I got to experience the Arboretum, and that is something interesting because it's such a different setting usually, and we don't see that in games, but it's also in space. I was wondering, have you played the game, and if you like went to the location and what you thought of that setting?
Yes, it's one of the it's an arcane game, as you say, so it's going to be good already. But yeah, it's one of the case studies which I want to dive deeper into in the book as well. And I've sort of dabbled in sort of analyzing that before, and have just having a look at it and chatting about it, and it's very interesting because it's one of these ones where it's designed to appeal simultaneously as something familiar, but just about unfamiliar enough at the same time to make it sort of right in its own setting. So if you look at it sort of maybe in a view, you'll see familiar sort of looking like placements of benches to look at plants and pathways, taking similar sort of familiar routes around planted up areas. But if you look closely, like some of the plants are almost look real, but they're definitely not. They're alien. So it's an interesting one because it's also it's providing a function. It's providing the oxygen for the spaceship as well. So it's a meeting of many functions and not just a place to prettify the spaceship, but it's actually doing a job. And it's a nice place to have his office as well.
True.
Do you think when like you see landscapes in video games and things like that, obviously there's lots of different research that you mentioned before would have to go into them. Obviously, I'm assuming you might analyze them or deconstruct them in a very different way to what we do based off having actual landscape design experience. So I'm like, is there anything when you go through a game that usually jumps out to you that is jarring, that let's say someone who doesn't have a landscaping background doesn't necessarily pick up on or take into consideration?
Yeah, maybe. And I think the weaknesses usually come from the fact that at the end of the day, the bottom line is this is a game that needs to be played, and certain things need to happen.
Gameplay needs to work. So
yeah, exactly. It all needs to work. Things need to be available to the player here,
and they need to be fun, right?
Yeah, and it all sort of all needs to work, doesn't it? It all needs to work in an experience. So as a result, some of the most jarring things that come to mind immediately are plant placements. Let's say, so you'll see lavender plants in Skyrim in the very very harsh winter environments, which you wouldn't see.
Because they wouldn't survive, right?
Yeah,
like it's that sort of thing. Yeah,
they're Mediterranean plants. And then the fact that you can go across the top to the bottom of our Assassin's Creed Valhalla and keep finding a couple of varieties of raspberries to put in. So it's, and that sort of makes sense to me in terms of where things might jar a little bit, because I think the similarities that we as garden designers, landscape designers have, as well as level designers and game designers generally, is that there is going to be an overlap of function, spatial awareness, proportion, things like that, where things are going to make sense. It's just sort of innate in the design process. That's why things like, I don't know, materials on a garden or a landscape never really sort of jar to me. Like in Dishonored, we keep using this as a good one because it's a good one. The spaces feel nice and proportioned for how you experience them, and so there is so that the design process obviously works.
I think it's fascinating. Like you made, like even using the lavender thing in Skyrim as an example. Like in any game, you do your research, right, or you do as much research as you can. But at the end of the game has to function. So you need, I don't know, X amount of collectibles in your game so you can get the foraging materials or crafting materials you need to do in your game. And I think that's where you'll see that overlap of, well, we haven't built a collectible or a model to change the plant, so we'll just put this plant in that zone, and then it doesn't match the climate or something like that. But it is always fascinating, and I think it's something in that process that you keep bringing up as well. And like we'll go through it as level designers for missions, for like architectural structures and stuff like that. It's all about the research, right? Because it's like it's in the detail, and that's always going to be the important thing to make it believable.
One of the things that actually always stood out to me, and this is as far as my landscape design experience goes, and I might be wrong, is that a lot of games like to use biomes because biomes and moving through different biomes is like interesting, like going from snow to like desert and whatnot. But then it's like if there's no loading between the two initial seamless, like in a big open world or stuff like that, they all just connect immediately and might have even the same plants. Is that also something that's basically very prominent in games that you wouldn't notice in real life, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, and some sort of paper over the cracks by just making the like a very quick transition.
Yeah.
Instead of just bumped up. But yes, of course that is how it is, and that's why if you can separate them out, it makes for a bit more of a cohesive experience in that one biome as opposed to. I think some of the open world games are sort of, because obviously they're having to work with or having to reinterpret sort of scale as well. Which is going to make it difficult. So again, it's that tension between authenticity and making it play well.
Yeah.
So there's I think there's some games that really. I'm going to actually talk about two games, which one does it very well and one does it very badly, and one is Ghost Recon Wildlands, which is set in Bolivia, my home country. And the other one is Breakpoint, that's set in some fictitious island because the Bolivians got pissed off with, Wildlands being set in Bolivia. But one is a very natural progression between biomes, and you can see how snow goes into cracks, and then like eventually you got rivers, and then you have water, you have plants and things like that, and it all feels very natural, progressive between one biome and the other. And then you've got Breakpoint, that you have snow and tropical, trees.
Side by side.
Side by side. In fact, there's snow underneath it. And then you're picking up acorns. And you're like, what the? Because in Breakpoint, you pick up.
Where am I?
Right. And I was like, this is like. I don't have experience with landscapes, but this is a little bit clashy, because
I just said that one seems a bit too obvious, though, a bit too jarring. Right. This tropical plant versus the snow,
especially for a fictitious island, but is still supposed to be Pacific Ocean set as well.
You're right, and it was very, very clashing, especially when it was the same, in theory, the same developer, and I was just like, wow, how could you get one so well done and another one so tone deaf? Because of the surely you've got the technology, right? At least you've got that, but what is other things that apart from like, oh well, this is a tropical plant, what is it doing at the top of a mountain? But is there other like patterns that you see that go like, whoa, that's a mistake? And I'm only asking you because I want to learn like what not to do,
Yeah, I think sometimes it there can also be still to do with plants, but different. Things can look, and this is only if you sort of really catch them at the right angles. They can look a bit too formulaic.
Okay.
So you might see trees in a line, which doesn't necessarily happen unless it was naturally, naturally in the true sense of the word. And so that can sometimes go, well, hey, okay, I can tell a person did that. Which is obviously true in terms of the game designer,
right?
But yeah, it's so you can just see like that. So things, because we're taught at university in garden design, you sort of never plant in lines unless you really, really have to. Never use really geometric shapes for planting in blocks or something like that. So anytime that comes up, with the caveat of understanding a bit about how the game's made and the levels put together, that can seem a bit jarring as well. But I think it's that is certainly happens fewer and far, but comparatively to the sort of incorrect plants off the top of my head, which is the big one.
How about the so I have to bring it up because it's actually in my contract about Death Stranding. I have to bring it up on every episode. Is part of our contract.
Death Stranding is a must.
I'm sure I missed this contract at some point. But okay.
I have to remember, like, is it Final Fantasy, the game that you're meant to? No, Resident Evil is the game that you're meant to say, and
Okay.
but I think if we're talking about jarring or maybe not jarring, is the juxtaposition, I think, in Death Stranding of this Icelandic kind of environment, but that's in the US. You know, it's like this black ash
Yeah,
and things like that, which is less landscape garden, but it's more like just landscape. You know,
yeah, for sure. So you've got this sort of treeless, primeval,
right?
almost landscape, which yes would only sort of come in natural settings where you've got incredibly cold winds as well, so these trees can't get a foothold, and just a very particular kind of style, and it's got its place. But yes, it was very strange to sort of see that sort of try to be sort of crowbarred into, and this is North America.
Yeah.
It's a strange one. That is a good example of a strange one, particularly when they're so sort of, yes, this is set in the real, in our world, as it were, and you therefore have a direct comparison. If you can go, well, our game world is inspired, but it's not really got the set location, then you can get away with it. But
especially when you have not like, oh, it's in the far future and a lot of bad stuff has happened, so well, because they're saying, oh no, I remember when the world went to crap, and you're like, well, okay, so you're not that old, it wasn't that long ago. And I can understand the losing of trees, but then you have like this volcanic ash everywhere, like, or like not even volcanic ash, but like black, like it's changed the rocks,
The geology,
the ground has changed.
Very powerful.
Yeah, but going back to things done right is like, for example, let's go back to Dishonored again, contractually obliged. Was it Karnaca? Was it the Grand Palace of Karnaca? I might be getting the place wrong.
Dishonored 2, yeah.
The one that looked like a broccoli landscape. Or am I talking about? There was one area in Dishonored that looked like broccoli surrounding the city. I swear to God.
I think I know the image you're thinking of. Yeah,
that's just the way I can describe it.
slightly stylized image across, a sort of big vista. But yes, there's several gardens across the Dishonored games, which are going to be case studies for the book, which I really want to, which I've only been able to sort of touch upon relatively briefly, and in the book I'll be able to dive into them a bit more. But I think the Duke's Palace in Karnaca is probably the best one, because everything works and is thought through, from materials and like implementation to size, bits of the size of slabs and rock, down to feature plants and using the geometry of the building to inform the design of the garden, and also like just getting the setting right and instilling a real sense of place to it. I remember there's a collectible, there's a note you can find at somewhere near the bottom, maybe underground somewhere near the palace, and it's from like the groundskeeper or the engineer complaining about how the fact that they're having to deal with the fact that the Duke wanted it built on a rocky peninsula where it shouldn't really be built, so they've got to deal with all the water and the erosion and the fact that it's so exposed.
Right.
And that makes
nice.
it, and it's a nice touch, because there are other touches like in that throughout the Dishonored series, but it's nice because that is exactly what would happen, and on both counts. The rich person wanting a massive, lovely garden would want it in an unrealistic position, and the people made to do it would be complaining about it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I mean, there's always that guarantee that the person building something has to whinge about the thing that they're building, right? I think it's a requirement.
I mean, we all do it, right?
Yeah, that's true. And we're building fictional things.
Yeah.
What would you say? Sorry,
fine.
I was just gonna ask, what would be good advice for like world designers and environment artists, for like making the worlds be a bit more natural and like to feel more real. Obviously, the fun factor comes first, but is there any advice that you would give?
I suppose, with the caveat of I'm not a game maker, and nor have I made one. I suppose there's for natural landscapes, I would say immersion in it is the best kind of sort of way to know it, to learn it, and to see it. And that again, that's a parallel with what I've done with researching for the book as well. The best kind of research is to play the games and to be in the landscape. That's also in real life as well, be it walking or sitting and drawing or playing golf. You know, you're actually having an active relationship with the landscape, as opposed to just seeing it through a lens or through a window or through a frame. So I would absolutely go for that, and maybe even where it's meant to be realistic, familiar and realistic, have something to firmly base it on, and look at everything from the geology to the different typologies that blend together, as we said earlier, right down to like, you can get loads of information from literally just knowing what the soil is. Again, sort of harking back to why it's changed in Death Stranding, but sort of what the rock types are, then you'll know what kind of plants grew there and do now and can survive. So in terms of that, there is, when looking at natural stuff, I think that is almost the best way to do it, and also to look at, if as far as we can, look at how earlier civilizations had a relationship with the landscape as well, when they didn't have to, when they were literally working on it and they relied on it, and there was a very tight kinship between the two. But then for something more designed, like the Gardens of Dishonored, or like I can't think of another example, but it's or something like a designed, I don't know, big landscape parks or open squares or something like that, is there's a lot to be said for, and that's where I think sort of people like me can come in with a bit of real world landscape architecture, garden design, history of that knowledge and working practice. There's a lot to be said for imbuing it with more meaning than just it's a corresponding place outside to these inside places. There's a lot more to sort of say, how can you tie it into a narrative, the story, the place, the characters, how are people using it, how has it changed over time, what's its future use going to be, did it used to be used for one thing? So there's sort of deeper levels of it, or layers of it, that you can really go for as well.
There's a talking about like kind of central places that people meet outside, for example. One thing that really comes to mind, which was, again, this is a procedural game as well. It's like it was called XCOM, which was, I think, UFO is a latest one. I always forget. It's called XCOM, isn't it? Enemy Unknown, I think it. And you start out in, like doing an attack outside, and that triggers off the fact that you're being attacked by aliens. I can't remember the story, but it was an outside space, and it looked like an outside kind of plaza that people would be hanging out in, and that believability really went into it. Like, in other words, it didn't jar in my brain. It was like, yes, I'm out here. And another game, sorry, I'm blanking, but it's not observation. It's a game where you have to report on other people, and there's like explosions in a main plaza as well.
Orwell?
Orwell, thank you. And even that, you have like shots of like the main plaza and things like that. That makes it very believable as an area that people go to, that congregate, and things happen. But yeah, so a lot of the design of gardens is not just, put some, green benches and stuff like that.
Yeah, right.
Some of the gardens are indoors, and one game, and again contractually obliged, is Control, because that's like a real brutalist game, but there's still like all these strange trees that I'm trying to find out the name of, which are like these big bulbous bases, and they look like fat trees essentially.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're sequoias or something like that. They're like these crazy trees, and you get this area, that feeling that, oh yeah, no, people want to congregate around nature. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's these elevated spaces inside this, what is essentially a brutalist nightmare.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of it, and that's exactly it. In terms of people would gravitate towards an area which has been softened by green stuff, by plants. There's also there's like, I can't remember who said it. There's sort of an innate thing in all of us that we all like to sit near or gravitate towards the sound of running water.
Mm.
And it's that kind of approach that sort of almost in our subconscious that you can appeal to as well. And so something like Control is a really good one. But they're all sort of still contained. The plants are mostly in containers of the same style, so it's sort of still there, but there's elements of it being softening the edges and making more attractive areas, as you say, apart from sort of overlaid on top of the brutalist concrete.
And is that not just shape-wise, because you've got these squares and angle compared to something natural? You've got a color difference, because I'm gonna be wrong, and you're gonna show me a screenshot now. But in my head, they're like pink and bright and red colors compared to the gray, and this is like that color theory also comes a lot into plants, right? That's the whole point. We have plants because they're like colorful things to have. And I think one of the games I think you're covering is Firewatch, and that always comes to me as like they really went into the color theory behind that.
Yeah, I think that was a great implementation of sort of a particular art style and stylistic approach to the landscape as well, and just using big broad brush strokes of color, but still looking like they've got the plants right, recreated the landscape lovely. But it's a great example of where the landscape and its portrayal succeeds because it's not trying to be hyper realistic. And there is very much a place for that as well.
It's like even with the abstraction they took, like the types of color, the shape, the blockiness, you still had that level of familiarity. So you still felt you were in a landscape or you were by a lake. So they still achieved it, but it's like what Mark was saying. They applied the techniques of color theory and shape theory and stuff like that, but it still felt believable and familiar if you saw it as like the complete package.
Yeah. And you can imagine being there and soaking it up as well. Yeah, for sure.
And it's kind of that lovely part where your brain fills in. Like my memory of Firewatch is probably a lot more detailed. It's 4K detailed. I could probably touch the bark, and when I look at it, you can't. And I think is
there is no bark.
Yeah, I know. But I don't know. The only thing I can call it is the uncanny valley of things. It's like the more games get to reality, you can be more picky about how good things are, right? But then sometimes you reduce the fidelity, and it works because your brain goes, well, that's obviously a plant, and you're like, it's just some pattern or a thing, a tree. And that's what I meant, was that in some games I've played and I go, that doesn't look like grass, and then in other games it's like 4 spikes. It's like totally grass. Yep.
Yeah.
Gonna run through that. Do you know what I mean? You're also covering a game that I'm a massive fan of, or it means a lot to me, which is Everyone's Gone to the Rapture, which I think they should have never named it that because that's kind of giving away the game. But that was, to me, was an amazing representation of an English village, right?
Yeah. And I think what was really particularly great about it it felt like, and you had to walk through it at a slow pace. I really like that, and you could do that. You can imagine doing the whole gladiator thing, brushing your hand through the wheat and the barley, and you could really sort of feel even though it was sort of local to the village, you feel immersed in the birch and bluebell forest, and it felt, well, for me, it's one down the road from back home in Essex as well, and it's just felt like like it should do. And it did it very well. It sort of simultaneously presented a spring and a summer English landscape together. So you had the summertime with the harvest, imminent harvest, but you had the springtime with the bluebells, and then the summer again with the roses coming out in some people's gardens. And I think there might have been some springtime daffs out as well. But that's a really good sort of, here's a fictional English village represented beautifully, gets the setting absolutely correct and right, and it works with the people, even has the local pubs and people interacting with the pub garden, and you can hear people talk about that, and it was one of those which was very, very memorable.
And I think your book has come, I mean, it's absolutely memorable. It also has encapsulated, I'm trying to look for good adjectives, like the perfect English village, right? This is the Midsummer Murders. This is like what Britain exports as the perfect time. It's just between, I don't know, May and end of July. That's when that village was made, and that's
exist outside of that.
Yeah, and it doesn't exist outside of that. There's no winter. There's no like horrible thing. And I think your book, in reality, you've got me thinking now that a lot of the stuff that we want to create, now that the world's opening up, fingers crossed, we can now start going exploring some more of those, go a bit further afield to explore those things, because we can do that in real life, but that's what games really give us, is this ability to, like, great, I want to go, I don't know, I'm not a massive fan of The Witcher, but there's nothing wrong with it. Don't send your hate mail, but...
That's a conversation for another time.
I know, but I just haven't got round to playing it. I haven't got round to playing it, okay?
Okay, have a falling out now.
Yeah, no, I don't have 120 hours to play a game just right now. We're busy making
worlds.
No, look, I've started it, all right? Just don't... I've started the argument. I don't think I've started the game. I've just started the argument. But do you know what I mean? It's like you can go into The Witcher and play hours and hours in an environment where you can't do at home over the last couple of years.
So it's kind of something I wanted to kind of touch on, because you mentioned being, Rob, like immersed in the environments. Obviously, we spoke about Dishonored and things like that, but they are very, what I would class like highly concentrated. Like, then they are like sandboxy, but they're not open world, let's say The Witcher or something like that in that terms of size. So is your preference when you do these deconstructions or these researchers analysis to go into something like The Witcher, where you can go to a town, you can then go down the stream and actually explore the local caverns and caves around it? Are those the kind of things you like to deconstruct further? It's like, what is your general selection process, especially for the book being like?
So I'd go for all of them. Yeah, I mean, The Witcher is one of my.
It's really rich, right? It's like,
yeah, it's one of my go-tos. It's one of my favorites and one of my go-tos when I'm when I've done talks to students or people at the RHS or whatnot. I usually that's the one I pick out for, let's say, natural landscape design kind of approaches as well. So yeah, I think I've followed most of the rivers through the mountain ranges in the Isles of Skellige. I've got favourite places that I'll go to and have another look round and take some screenshots there as well. So yes, so whilst there's the overly designed, concentrated stuff like Dishonored, but it is like your Skyrims and your Witchers, actually going there and go, well, what is there that's familiar? What can we pick out that maybe was the real world inspired, and then how have they put their own interpretation on that, and then what is also brand new. And we know game like The Witcher is sticking to that. We know that it was based on folklore from Northern Europe, so we know that it's going to have that, and we know that Skellige has a sort of Celtic and sort of Nordic inspiration, but you can see that, and you can see it in the landscape as well. as well, and how it's portrayed, and have, you know, big large mountain ranges with the sun setting down it, and they've, you know, intentionally put some sort of journey towards that so you can see that, and the way that plants will change as you go into caves, plants will change as you go up mountains and go down mountains towards the streams. So there's plenty to deconstruct in The Witcher as well, and I think what that one is particularly good at also is doing that wild, untouched stuff like Skellige, but also real world sort of landscape design and how people are interacting with it and using the land. Obviously, it's agricultural. It's growing your own stuff. There's a strong relation to the herbalists, for example, and they craft their own gardens, and it's very looked after. There's protective about it. And also in The Witcher, you can't even progress. That's mild spoilers, maybe for Mark. But you can't.
He's not going to do it. It's fine.
Okay, spoilers for Mark. You can't progress the main story unless you engage in some horticulture and talk to a herbalist quite near the beginning. So there is, and
so
again,
deep connection with like the actual land that you're going to be traversing is actually like no, you got to connect. You can't just like
you've got
walk
to
all
do
over
this.
it.
You've got to do this, and then you end up going, well, okay, now I know what, I don't know, this plant does, and I need to look out for it. And then when you go through the journey through the landscape, even not following quest lines, you end up knowing what the plants look like, where they do grow, because The Witcher was quite good at that, and then you can use that as a navigational tool as well. Getting used to the different types of landscapes and the plant. You go, oh, I know, okay, that plant I know sort of grows near tracks and paths. I'm going to get, you know, I'm close to some sort of route. But yeah, there's just that there is a really deep connection to it in terms of how people were living off it, and there's, you know, you can hear people again complaining and swearing about working the vines in Tucson, and so you can, it's great like that. It's great.
I'm going to ask, having no knowledge of The Witcher, do you know this because you are much more an expert in landscape and growing things? Because I could just see myself just running around going, I can't find any roots anywhere. Like, Mark, you're at the top of a mountain. There is nothing here. or is that part of the game that it teaches you that?
Yeah, I think there's the easy answer is there's an element of both.
Okay.
But the fact is that the game does introduce this kind of relationship with the land and what grows on it so early on that it is, you know, the fact that the game's doing any teaching like that to me is great as well. But it does because then you get used to it, and then you know how to get around, what to look out for.
Kind of forces you to explore the land as well, right? So when you are doing these herbalist quests or whatever, or foraging for the roots or whatever you need, it forces you to look around. Similar to the Witcher's character, he's a hunter, right? So he'll go and dispatch a monster that's plaguing a village that could be in the middle of nowhere, but there'll be something attaching you to that. And it's always reflected in the state of the village, how the people react to it, whether they've got no crops left. So there's always that connection as well.
But that sounds like a good one. So talking about growing stuff, and I don't know if you cover it in your book, but in The Last of Us 2, that it seemed that like society had evolved a bit more, and there was like actual growing patterns. I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but there is they're growing stuff, and they've got like more civilization than in The Last of Us 1 Part 1, and that has haunted me a little bit, because it's like, okay, so you got all these bad things, monsters, the usual thing that the zombies are the least of your problems compared to humans, but you also start thinking, well, once humans get to the point that they're growing crops, you start trading, right? Because you'll have other people hunting stuff, and that's where you start getting communication. You start getting more cohesiveness rather than less. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think a good juxtaposition of that is the fact that in that kind of scenario, in that world, the humans have to reset their relationship with the landscape as well. Totally, it's gone back to exactly how it was, you know, totally organically, no mass farming, no chemicals, nothing. You've got to do it from learn it all again from the ground up, and rekindle this the relationship with the land. And yeah, in that I can visualize it now in the location, in a location where they're doing it. They're sort of doing it in an orderly, efficient manner to just try and maximize product output, as it were, and yield.
Yeah, for however many people are left,
Yeah.
So we're talking about all these gardens and stuff that are in specific games, and they're just like parts of the game. They're not the main part of the game. And I just remembered a game that is actually just about gardens. I think it was released recently. You may have heard of it, called Cloud Gardens, where it's this apocalyptic kind of like a isometric looking environment where you like plant things on buildings that are old and apocalyptic, and you create gardens, literal gardens with stuff. And I wonder if you had a chance to take a look at it, and what your opinions were on that.
I have not, but but I'm aware that there's, because it's now easier than ever to make a game, or make some a small game. You can make one in a lot of folks are doing it from their bedroom. There has been a sort of new wave on these ones, because it's also, gardening is great for the soul, for lack of a better term. It's very relaxing, it's very good for you, and there's been a small wave of games being made that just do that. I know there's one I saw one that was trying to gain support. I haven't checked up on it, that was about foraging, purely about foraging. There was one about botany and sort of the science of it as well. So it's in terms of the actual sort of like, here's a game about doing it or learning about it and just chilling out.
There's a lot more focus on that.
It is the game. Then there's a few to check out, and you've called me out of it.
Yeah, and it's fun how people.
It's not a call out; it's just a recommendation.
No. Yeah, it's I was actually wondering. I haven't played it myself, so I was wondering like how are the plants depicted in that game actually. But yeah, there seems to be like humans are really drawn to like gardens and planting stuff, and just even we can see that in our games a lot. Like we can have like these smaller focus games that just do that, and it's like you said. I think it's this self-care and this relaxation that those places give you, right?
Well, it's Animal Crossing, isn't it a big part of that?
Yes, in a way, some part of it.
Again, like Witcher 3 and Animal Crossing.
The biggest games ever.
Stardew Valley is a good one, I suppose, for that as well. Yeah.
Oh yeah, Stardew Valley has a lot of that. It's a lot about farming. And
look, I'm not going to bring up Plants vs Zombies, but no, I just. I mean, I think there's been the reason that, like, I'm really attracted to this idea of the nature and how true it is, because I think one of the first games that really got me down the road of I'd like to make a game because it made me feel things was Dear Esther, which is based on Scotland, Scottish environment, the Hebrides, right? I was thinking Isle of Skye, but it's not. It's the Hebrides, and I'm not very good with Scotland. Sorry, Valentina. My geography is terrible. And in that, I was going like, wow, there's such wild depictions of. It was the first time that landscapes were actually the main character, I guess.
Yeah, you beat me to it. I thought that's where you were going. Yeah. There's been when that sort of care and attention to it has gone, well, it's not just this environment, this landscape, this world is not just for passing through. It's actually a major player in the game as well. That again is for me elevates them to another level, for sure. And Dear Esther is sort of almost a sort of deceptively simple beauty. It sort of captures the wild beauty of the Hebrides, but also like the danger, the fact that it is so isolated. It's wind battered. That is a particularly good one. Again, maybe the pace that you're kept to exploring it means that you have it. One, you have the opportunity to soak it up, and two, you can you can look around and you can actually look down and see the mossy rocks and
map of Dear Esther just here with reflections. Might not show it, but that's the map of Dear Esther. And yeah, you're right. It's because, and also you didn't have a lot of actions to perform as a player, right? You had to just but you could enjoy, you could pace, something that we don't get to do quite a lot. I don't know if that, well, maybe all of you do, but and this is the same juxtaposition of looking at plants, having benches in front of something to contemplate, time to zen out, and finding that in a game was very I don't know, enriching for my life. We're like, oh, okay, right, I'm allowed to do that. I'm not meant to just be shooting the crap out of things,
You don't have to charge past areas, yeah.
It's the focus. Like, the focus was shifted because, like, we were talking about Dishonored earlier, and it's like you're describing all these hyper detailed gardens, but I can guarantee, I'll be generous, like 70% of people won't see them. They'll just run straight through and go to the target and miss it. But there'll be 30% of people that methodically go through an environment, finding every note and finding every collectible. Which, from a development point of view, is why you want to put something really cool in this level of detail into your space. Your producer will probably tell you no, because their argument will be 10% of people will probably look at this, and that's the argument you usually have to fight for it. But I think, as like you mentioned before, like as our tools get better and like the content creation pipelines and stuff get a little bit more streamlined, so it does become a little bit easier to get content into the game, that's why we're starting to see this level of detail go up, and we're getting more high fidelity environments. And
especially with Quixel and the tools from Quixel, for example. Like,
I think like UE5 will be a game changer, especially for smaller studios. Like, because big studios they have hundreds of artists to do this stuff, but now you're going to start to see the like quality level of games go up at a smaller studio scale level as well.
And I mean, even if you don't explore that garden, say in whatever game, even just getting a glimpse of it immediately just ticks a few boxes. Yeah, there's people here, because gardens are like, and communal places means society, means people, means a few things. And like, even if you don't explore it, it's just there. It already adds to the world itself. So maybe that is enough to create a direction for the game without it needing to be explored and whatnot in detail.
I think on that note, we can now cut the recording and head out and enjoy nature for a little bit longer. and think of you.
I have a weird question before we head off. Actually, where do mushrooms stand in all landscape and gardening? Because we have this whole mycelium network, and it's huge, but we don't see that in games. What about mushroom placement? Right? Is that part of like nature and something we don't see much in games? Because I really love mushrooms, as a concept. They're this huge. They're like this whole different thing, and games don't touch it.
Just mushrooms.
Just.
I think things like that, which is just to take it and make a bit more of a broader point, things like that would probably get put in the category of a more general approach to it sort of looking right, as opposed to being botanically correct or horticulturally correct. So,
but seasonally correct as well.
Well, indeed, yes, we didn't. Yes, indeed, seasons is a massive thing as well. But yeah, so you'll see them sort of, and it will look familiar and it will look right. But I think I'd have to direct you to a mushroom expert.
There's a fantastic.
It's a whole different thing, right?
Yeah, that's a whole different thing, and like we'll keep that off the show. But there's a whole show actually on Netflix about fungus.
I've watched that. That's why I was bringing it up. It's this whole other part of nature that we don't see as much in games. And
I was just going to point that way.
Yeah, and they're some of the largest organisms on Earth, literally. Yeah. So they are important and key. But I suppose it's just because they're hidden, lesser known, lesser appreciated.
It's a shame.
And on that note, we shall send our appreciation to the mushrooms and send our massive appreciation to you, Rob. Thank you for being on the show. It's been a wonderful thing. We'll put a link to Genius Loci in the show notes, and it's actually been published by Let me just have a look. By Unbound, who is a lovely publisher of books. Somebody else on the podcast has been here.
Konstantinos.
Konstantinos Dimopoulos, yeah.
Dimopoulos, with... I'm forgetting the name. I'm sorry.
Virtual Cities.
Virtual Cities. Oh my god. I've been...
And urban design, Lakna. It's the opposite, basically, of nature and landscapes and gardening.
So you have to have these books, like bookending your library.
Side by side.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again, Rob. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you, dear listeners, for listening to and watching this episode of the Level Design Podcast. We really appreciate you, and it'd be great if you left us a review, do a like, all the nice things that you do to things that you listen and watch. Thank you very much. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
This has been a Command Studios production. Our editor is Matthew Lever. Our theme tune is by the awesome James Elsey. You can follow us on Twitter @LevelDesignFan, but we're also available on all podcasters out there, but you can visit us on anchor.fm/leveldesign.